So hello everyone and welcome to today's webinar by Phrase. Today we are focusing on a core pillar of our product offering, the Phrase TMS, and specifically we are going to be looking at the role of a project manager and what features and capabilities project managers need to know in order to work efficiently with Phrase TMS. Okay, without further ado, I will introduce today's speaker. We have Randy Scansani joining us. Hi, Randy, how are you?
Hello, hi everyone, and welcome. I'm fine, thanks. Hope everyone is fine. Glad to be here.
Great to have you. Thank you. Randy is our solutions engineer and he has prepared the demo for us. So I'm going to start the demo now. Enjoy.
Hello, and welcome to this webinar on Phrase TMS, Translation Management System. In this webinar, we are going to cover Phrase TMS features that are specifically relevant for project management. What I'm sharing here is the project's view of Phrase TMS. This is what you usually see when you log into Phrase TMS as a project manager. To start this session, we will dive into the main features and buttons that we are seeing on this project's view. So starting from the top right, here you get access to your profile information. This is where, for example, you can upload a profile picture, you can update your first name and last name, your email, and your password. Clicking on this bell-shaped icon, you can have access to your notifications. This is where you would see if you have specific warnings related to your projects. Let's go back to the projects view. We also have a functionality to look for anything in Phrase TMS, for example, anything that contains the word agent. You see that we have a few projects with agent in the name, a few jobs with agent in the name. So this is a search functionality based on the name of your resources. Now let's focus on this list of projects and see what we can do with it. So for each project, you have information split into several columns, where you can see the creation date of the project. Of course, you can see the name of the project, the progress bar as well, who's the owner, what's the status of the project. You can also filter projects by, for example, their client. So let's see, I only want to see projects belonging to this specific customer. I can do that, and you can also save these changes in a view so that next time you are able to access the list of projects that belong to this specific customer. These columns are also customizable. Suppose that you're not really interested in seeing who the project owner is for all of these projects. You can just hide the column so that this is not showing in your view. We also have a beta feature here to search projects content. This is a more advanced feature than the search one that I was showing a few seconds ago. Here, for example, if you look for phrase, you can look for phrase in the source sentence or in the target sentence. You also have some advanced options. And if you click on search, you will get the list of projects where the word phrase appears on the source side. Now, you are probably all familiar with the concept of projects. So just to be sure, let me clarify. A project is essentially the folder where you store everything that you need for your translation project. That would be the file to be translated and the translation memory, so the database of previously translated content, your term base, which is essentially a glossary, and so on and so forth. And we will dive deeper into everything that you can add to your phrase projects. Now, in phrase, each file to be translated into a specific target language is called job. And here we have a jobs view. So this is where you can look at all the jobs that belong to the projects that we were just looking at in the projects view. Here I have quite a long list of jobs. And again, here you can filter your jobs. We can also group jobs based on the content of these columns. For example, I can group jobs based on their file name. And then in the list of jobs, there are some operations that you can carry out without having to switch to your projects view or without having to open the job itself, such as adding a provider. So here I can assign this job to one of my providers or more providers. In the translation memories view, I have the full list of translation memories. In the translation memories view as well, we have filtering options and some options to customize the columns that you want to see. We also offer a functionality to look for a specific word in any translation memory or in a specific translation memory. Now, let me just specify that this user that I am using for this demo is a project manager user with full access to translation memories and term bases. There might be cases where the admin of your phrase organization does not want project managers to enter translation memories and edit translation memories. Let me just open one translation memory. So as soon as you open a translation memory, you have access to the main information about it. Here as well, you can search through the content of the translation memory. So you are going to see all segments where a specific word appears. And here you can also get information about this segment by hovering with your mouse over this blue symbol. And you can also delete specific segments by clicking on this red symbol. A translation memory can be populated with external content. Suppose that you have a TMX file that is coming from a different tool and you want to import it inside this translation memory. This is, of course, supported in Phrase. We support TMX file, MXLI files, SDLXLI files. You can also import XLSX file with one column for each language. We also offer an alignment tool where you can align one source and one target file. Suppose that you have a Word file in English and the translated version in French. You can upload both files here and align the file content on a segment level. You can also import multiple files, and then you can also export the content of a translation memory, either in a TMX file or in an Excel file. Now let's switch to the term bases view. Again, here you have the list of all your term bases. A term base is essentially a glossary where you store your preferred terminology. This glossary can be used during quality assurance, for example, to make sure that your translation is compliant with whatever you have stored inside your term base. So inside the term base, you can see all the terms that belong to this specific term base. You can see in which projects this term base has been used. Now, something that has just been released in the Phrase platform is the possibility to add more metadata to each term inside the term base. So let's pretend that I want to add the word webinar as an untranslatable word in this term base. I can now add this term. And now that I have my term, I can edit it and add information about the term. So I can decide whether this is supposed to be a preferred term or a forbidden term. I can specify whether the matching should be case sensitive or not, if it should be an exact match type or a fuzzy match type. And we can add information about the part of speech. This is a noun, and let's pretend that it's a masculine noun and it's singular, of course. We can add note and a short translation, the type of the term, if it's an acronym, for example, and also more metadata about the domain, subdomain, and definition and concept note. If you usually handle term bases where each term contains granular metadata, it's worth mentioning that we also support the addition of custom fields. Switching to the users view, this is where you can see the list of users having access to Phrase TMS. Each user has a role. So the admin role, the name is pretty self-explanatory. Admins can do whatever they want. So they can change settings, they can handle the subscription, they can create projects and jobs and translation memories, and so on and so forth. Project managers have more or less the same rights that administrators have, with the exception that they cannot handle the subscription. And then you can have linguists. Linguists have access to jobs and projects assigned to them, but cannot edit the project settings. Guests are users with access to Phrase TMS in view-only mode. You can create a guest user for your client, for example, to give them access to the translation memory, to the term base, or to the projects that are specific to that client, so that they can access their resources. You can also create a submitter user. A submitter user is a user that only has the right to submit content for translation, and we will see how you can leverage that in Phrase in a few seconds. Now let's continue with the tour of the Phrase TMS tabs. Here I am accessing the Phrase Language AI tab. Phrase Language AI is our suite of machine translation tools. Inside Phrase Language AI, you can create different profiles. Let me just edit one to show you what it is. So a profile is essentially a tool set where you can store all the tools that you want to use for translation. Phrase supports more than 20 engines that you can toggle on or toggle off in your AI profile. And when you use Phrase Language AI profiles in a specific project, Phrase Auto Select is our algorithm that, based on the content of your project and based on the language pair, is going to pick the best engine among the ones that you have enabled in your profiles. You can also create machine translation glossaries. Machine translation glossaries are glossaries that are specifically built to tailor the output of machine translation to your preferred terminology. Next, we have Phrase Analytics. Phrase Analytics is the dashboard where you can have full control and full visibility over your localization efforts and processes. You can access several nice visualizations that tell you what volumes you are handling, for example, on a monthly basis, and what's the amount of content that you are handling for each specific language pair. We also offer other visualizations, for example, about the usage of machine translation. You can also customize the view. You can check which projects you are delivering on time and which ones are overdue. And you can also have other visualizations about the quality of your projects, what errors they contain based on the LQA that you have run on your content, and so on and so forth. A few minutes ago, I was talking about the submitter role. So a user that you want to be able to upload content for translation without actually having access to the project where the translation process happens. So the submitter user is ideal to be used for the submitter portal. The submitter portal is a portal that we offer inside Phrase TMS, where a user can select a service. In this case, I have set up this service for machine translation plus post editing in German and Italian from English. I can load a file for translation, a very simple one here, and I am going to immediately receive a quote for the translation of this file in the two target languages. Of course, the submitter portal can be customized. You can create your own services, you can add your own rates, so that everything that you're seeing here is fully customized to your processes and prices. And as soon as the submitter user submits the project, as a project manager, if you switch to your projects list, you are going to see that you have a new project to be handled with the file that I was just uploading as a submitter. In the integrations tab, you have access to the list of connectors that you have enabled in your Phrase TMS instance. These connectors offer an out-of-the-box integration to some of the most popular CMSs or code repositories or file repositories. And then the settings tab, this is where you have, of course, access to the settings of the Phrase platform. I just wanted to spend a few seconds on a few settings that are particularly relevant here. The first two items can be relevant here. The recycle bin, of course, this is where anything that you delete from your Phrase TMS instance is going to end up. Archive projects, this is the list of projects that you do not want to see anymore in your main project list, but still you do not want to delete this project because it might be relevant in the future. So instead of deleting it, you just archive it. That allows you to keep a project list that is tidy and relevant. Now let me go to the very bottom of this long list of settings here. Something that is relevant is that for your user, you can decide in which language you want the Phrase platform to be localized. Something that we highly recommend is that you set your time zone so that everything that is assigned to you, all the tasks assigned to you, always appear with the relevant time in your Phrase instance. One last thing, let me just mention that you can also import your own spell checker dictionaries. So here you can import an Excel file with a list of words with the correct spelling that you want to enforce in your spell checker. All right, and that has concluded the tour of the TMS tabs. Now we will look more in details at the project creation process. All you have to do is click on New Project here. This will open the list of settings that you can add to your project. So let's just give it a name here, Webinar December 3rd. And then you can select one source language and multiple target languages here. I'm just going to add two of them, let's say German and Italian. We also support language locales. We can specify a due date, let's say maybe the 11th of December. And here there's a long list of metadata that you can assign to this project, such as the client name or the domain of the project, the subdomain of the project. This is, you can of course add your own list of domains and subdomains. Here you can decide whether you want to use the same language AI profile for all target languages or whether you want to use a dedicated profile for each target language. Suppose that you have a preferred machine translation engine for translation into German, then you can use a specific profile for that translation and use two different profiles, one for German and one for Italian in this case. Then in the workflow settings, this is where you can split your projects into steps. The first step could be machine translation, where you run machine translation to populate the target. And then you could have a second step with post editing, which I'm pretty sure you're all familiar with the concept, but it's basically a human checking the output of a machine translation. And then you could have a third step, that is the final revision. This is just an example though. You could have a fourth step and a fifth one as well. And then we have the pre-translation settings. In the pre-translation settings, you can decide whether you want to combine machine translation with translation memory and with non-translatables. Non-translatables are an AI-based recognition of non-translatable items. For example, if you have a segment that only contains an email address, phrases will automatically identify it as a non-translatable and will avoid translating it. You can also define a TM threshold, if you set your threshold to 98%, for example, it means that if you have a match from the translation memory for a specific segment that is at least a 98% match, then you are going to translate using the TM. If you have matches lower than 97%, then you are going to use machine translation to pre-translate. And then you have a few settings that are specifically dedicated to the CAT editor, such as auto-propagation for repetitions, so populate repetitions of a specific segment as soon as a translation is provided for the first occurrence of that segment. Or you can decide to suggest machine translation only for segments that have a match below a specific threshold. And then we have the quality assurance tab. This is where you can decide which QA checks you want to run. So you know that QA checks are checks that make sure, for example, that you are not adding extra numbers in the target with respect to the source, or it would check whether your translation is consistent with whatever you have in your term base. It would check if tags are translated consistently in the target, and so on and so forth. You can see that there are a few QA checks options. You can also customize the QA checks. Suppose that in your text you use a specific set of symbols in the source that should be translated with a specific set of symbols in the target. You might want to check whether the source segment and the target segment both comply with your rules. For each of these checks, you can decide whether you want to enable them for the instant QA, which means that as soon as the linguist tries to confirm a segment, if the target is empty, then they get immediately a QA telling them that they can't confirm the segment because the target is empty. And you can also decide whether they can be ignored or not. So if they can't be ignored, it means that the linguist has to take actions to make sure that, for example, the target is not empty anymore, or that there are no multiple spaces in the target. Then access and security allows you to set specific options for what the linguists can and cannot do in your project. Just to mention a few relevant ones, if linguists are able to edit lock segments, to edit the source of a segment, and to edit the tag content as well. We have a few options for the spell checker. For example, if you want to check all the words that are in all caps, you know that sometimes words in all caps, they can be acronyms. So you might want to ignore them when spell checking. Then completed file name and export paths. This is where you can specify a pattern for the name of the completed file. In the financials settings, you can decide your net rate scheme and the price list to be used to generate a quote for this project. So the price list is where you establish, of course, the prices for the different tasks, for post-editing or for revision or for full translation. And then in the net rate scheme, this is where you would decide what discounts you want to apply, for example, when there is a translation memory match. Then you can also decide how the TM matching should happen. Usually here, you would use as context previous and next segment. This means that you would get a 101% match from your TM whenever you are translating a segment that has an identical occurrence in the translation memory. And both segments, the one in your job and the one in the translation memory, were preceded and followed by the same segments. There are some cases where you want to use the key. I don't know if you're familiar with JSON files, for example. JSON files, they always have a key holding a value, just like in a dictionary where you have a word and the definition. The word would be the key and the definition would be the value. So in those cases, instead of relying on the previous and next segment, which might not be too relevant, you want instead to compute the 101% match looking at the key. So if you are translating a source segment that has an identical occurrence in the translation memory, and both of them have the same key, then you are going to get a 101% match. Right, so these were the settings that are available to you when you create a project. Now we have specified the name and source and target languages, so we can just click on create project. Okay, now that we have our project, we can start adding resources to it. Here starts the practical part of the webinar. So I can now either create a new translation memory if I don't have a relevant translation memory for this project, or just select an existing one. In this case, I'm selecting an existing one. And you can also decide whether you want to add your translation memory to all target languages, because Phrase supports multilingual translation memories. So translation memories where you can have one source language and multiple target languages, or whether you want to upload separate translation memories for each target language. You can also decide whether this translation memory should be available in all workflow steps, or whether it should be available only for an individual workflow step. Suppose that you have the first workflow step where you do post editing, and then you have the following workflow step where you are doing revision. The finalized version of your translation is going to be created in the revision step. So maybe you want to keep a translation memory dedicated for the revision step, where you only store the translations where you are 100% sure that are correct. And in the post-editing step, you want to use a temporary translation memory. Let me select one translation memory from my list. I can add also more than one. For example, I can add 2. For each translation memory, you can decide whether you want to define a priority order. You can decide whether both translation memories should be added with write permissions, meaning that you are not adding new content to it. You are just using this translation memory to look for matches. You can also add a penalty to a translation memory. Suppose that you know that this translation memory is not 100% up to date. You still want to use it because it might contain useful hints for your linguists, but they shouldn't rely on it too much. So you want to make sure that there are no 101% matches coming from this translation memory. In that case, you can apply a penalty. All right, now we've added our translation memories. We can do the same thing with the term base. Again, here you can either create a new one or select a term base and decide whether you are loading a term base for all languages or just some of them. For each term base, you can decide what you want to do with it. For example, if you only want to read it, but you do not want to use it for the QA, or whether you want to use it for the QA, but you do not want to write new terms to it. And here again, you can add also multiple term bases with different settings. Let's save this one. And you can also add references to your project. I don't know if you're used to working with style guides. For example, if you have your file with style guides, you can upload it. So for example, I can add a PDF here as a style guide, and your linguists will be able to access it. And you can also add a note for them. Right. Now that we have created the skeleton for our project, meaning that we have added source and target languages and translation memories, what we can do is we can save this project as a template. Saving this project as a template allows us to reuse these settings next time that we create a new project. You can even add providers for your jobs in each workflow step. So next time that you are going to create your project using this template and you create a German and Italian job in the post-editing step, these users are going to be assigned to the job. So this is how you can leverage project templates, right? Now let's go back to our beloved project, and we are ready to add a job. So all I have to do is to click here. Here I can upload a file, and for example, I could use this one. It's a Word document. We support a wide array of file formats, of course. You can decide whether you want to upload this file for both target languages or just for one of them. In this case, we're going to upload it for both target languages. You can select the due date, again, for your job. And you can also decide whether you want to automatically run pre-translation as soon as the job gets created. You can assign providers to each job. So let me just assign this provider here and this other for Italian. Actually, this is the machine translation workflow step, so we don't want any provider added to it, right? But we can do this in the other steps. Okay, now here we have a few import settings. So Phrase is able to auto-detect your file type and apply the parsing mechanism that is relevant for your file type. But suppose that you have specific things to be added to the file import settings. For example, for Microsoft Word documents, you might want to import comments as well. You might want to upload the document properties to load hidden text as well. So we also support this kind of settings for each file type. So you can also specify if there are specific blocks of characters that you want to convert into a phrase tag. For example, if you have characters or words that are enclosed between curly braces, you might want to protect them as a tag in case they do not contain a translatable item. This is usually relevant, for example, if you have code strings. Right. You can create your own segmentation rules. Suppose that you want to keep all the items in a bullet list together. You might want to decide not to split, not to segment on a semicolon, for example. Now let's create the job. Now that we have our job, we can also see that the workflow steps have appeared in the view, and our jobs are now ready and pre-translation has successfully run. Again, I've already mentioned this at the beginning of the webinar, but just to make sure that we are all aligned on that, a job is essentially one file to be translated into a target language. Now, there are a few operations that you can perform on a job once they are created. Of course, one of them is editing a job. And you can do that also in batches, right? You can edit both jobs here. And for example, you can assign them to one provider. So we've said that this is a machine translation step and we did not want to add providers, but just for the sake of showing how it works. All right, now we have a provider for the machine translation step as well. We can, of course, run an analysis. Phrase supports different types of analysis. The default analysis is the analysis where you would check how many words you have in your jobs, what's the amount of repeated words, what's the amount of words coming from the translation memory, and so on and so forth. And then the post-editing analysis measures the editing effort. So it measures the edit distance between the output of machine translation or the match from the translation memory and the edited version. And then the compare analysis compares a document in a specific workflow step with the document in the preceding workflow step to check again what has been changed and how much has been changed. So let's run the analysis on the source side for both jobs. And we see that it went pretty fast. It's already available. Once the analysis has run, you can also open it and see the results, right? So we see the number of segments, the number of words, the number of characters and repetitions and matches for both jobs. Now that we have our analysis, we can also add a quote by clicking on add quote. And this is quote for English into German, let's say. You can decide whether the quote should be created for all workflow steps or just one of them. You can select one provider that you want to create this quote for. Price list and net rate are the default ones. If you have more, you can pick it here. And of course, you want to create this based on the analysis that we've just created. So here it lets you review your pricing scheme. And here I have the minimum price. So the price that you usually agree with your clients for projects that are smaller than a specific number of words. So we can click on next to create the quote, and we can even directly email the quote to our provider. So here I can click on save and email. I can use a template so that I don't have to write this from scratch every time. So you see that in the template, you have the URL that the provider, that the linguist can use to confirm the quote. Now we click on send email, and we will see that now this has status for approval. Of course, the status will change as soon as the provider will accept the quote. Now, speaking of linguists, let's look at the CAT editor, which is the environment where they would work. Let's start from the basics. Of course, source segments on the left, target segments on the right. We also offer a live preview where you can immediately see, where you can look at the source document preview, and you can see how the target translation is going to look like in the target document. This is called a live preview because it gets updated live as you translate, right? So if I add words here, I see that the text is changing in my live preview. Then you can see that I have matches coming from my translation memory here, 101% matches. In other cases, I have a pre-translation from machine translation. This is the QPS score, quality performance score. It tells you how well this target text translates this source text. It can be used by project managers to filter out translations that are already good enough and that you do not want to send to a full review. We also get suggestions from the term base. Here in my term base, I had added phrase language AI as a term. So you see that I immediately get this suggestion. And of course, if I change this into anything that is not compliant with the glossary, I immediately get a warning telling me that this is not compliant, because if you remember in the project settings, we had enabled the instant QA check. These blue symbols here with numbers inside them, these are tags. There's also an option to expand the tags here. So this option is useful for cases where the tag contains content that should be localized. Remember the example of the URL, where the URL might be, in this case, /en, and here you might want to add /de for German. So in those cases, you can expand tags, of course, provided that you've given your linguists the right to edit tags. Now, we were speaking of QA, quality assurance. You can run it inside this tab here as well if you want to run all checks in one go. You can also enable checks for the max length of the target text. We also offer a commenting feature here. So in case you want to leave comments for your linguists, or linguists leave comments for you, you can leave a comment for a single segment or for a batch of segments. A couple of other interesting things that I wanted to show you here in the editor before we go back to the remaining features of the projects view is that, of course, you can split and join segments. So for example, here I can click on split segment and I have divided my segment into two parts. And then of course, you can also join segments, right? So now we have joined them back. Now back to the project page. I just wanted to share with you some useful tools that you might use quite often in your day-to-day operations. So first of all, here we have a set of tools. If you select a job, one or more jobs, then you can decide whether you want to email this job to a provider. You can split the file. So suppose that this is a huge file, and you have a very tight deadline. You might want to split these files into 3 or 4 parts and assign each part of the file to a specific user. You can export workflow changes. So this is the machine translation step here, and this is the post-editing step. And you can see that I have changed one occurrence just to show you what it looks like when you do some changes. You can also clone the job in case you need to create another instance of this very same job. We also offer this functionality to extract terms. So we go through this job and extract the relevant terminology if you need to create a term base from scratch. This can be quite useful. Then update source and update target. Suppose that you have already created the job and then the customer gets back to you saying that they realized there were a few things to be fixed in the document. So you want to, instead of loading the document again from scratch, you can just update the source, and this is going to update only the segments that have been changed by the customer. Update target can be used if, for example, the linguist has worked in an external tool, so they haven't worked in Studio. They want to update the target with the changes that they have made in another platform. Here they can update the target by uploading the updated version. And then the upload functionality is a little bit different from update target. So this one can be used, for example, in combination with download bilingual docx. Let me just explain what I mean. Suppose that you have review done by your customer, but your customer doesn't want to enter Phrase TMS. They just want to receive a bilingual docx file and do the review in the bilingual docx file. So here you can download the docx file to send it to your customer. Your customer can open it in Microsoft Word, for example, do a review of the bilingual docx file, and then you can upload the reviewed version here. So that way you would be able to import the changes done by your customer, and without, of course, having to just copy paste changes from one file to Phrase TMS. You can also assign providers from a template, so you can select a specific template here, and you have the revision step in this template, and you can select the providers that you have set in the other template. Now, we have already briefly touched on the download button, so you can download the original file. You can download bilingual files such as MX3 files or docx file. You can also export it as a TMX file, especially if you want to import this into a translation memory. And then you can download completed file and final file. Completed file is the translated file. So here we have translated a docx file into German. We are going to download a docx file containing the German translation. The final file is a version of the file that has been completed, but then it has been modified outside of Phrase and imported back into Phrase. Let me just give you an example. Suppose that you are handling an InDesign file where the layout is of utmost importance. So what happens is that translation might break the layout, especially if you are translating into German, where the target text tends to be much longer than the source text. So your client might want to receive the translated InDesign file to modify the layout of the file, right? Making sure that the layout is correct. And then you might upload it back here. This process is called file handover, and it can be enabled on your project. If you have enabled file handover and you have uploaded a file version that has been modified outside of Phrase, then you can download it by clicking on Final File. So you will download the completed file modified outside of Phrase and import it back into Phrase. And then in case you are using online repositories such as Google Drive, OneDrive, SharePoint, or a CMS we integrate with, you can re-import source from online repository. And the same goes for the target version, of course. All right, now let's conclude this webinar by touching on a very important topic, that is LQA, Linguistic Quality Assessment. So LQA can be enabled in a project by adding a specific workflow step for it. So we can edit our project settings here. This is also useful to show you that you can add workflow steps even after project creation, provided that these workflow steps are supposed to happen after the workflow steps that you have already added. So here I can add quality assessment, enabling error annotation And I can even specify a profile if I have created a custom one. Let's just do this and save project. And I can show you what quality assessment is and what it looks like in Phrase TMS. So now we can open the German translation, and language quality assessment is a procedure where you can annotate specific errors in the target text. Let's just click on the LQA tab here on the right and start the LQA. So now what I can do is I can go segment by segment and, for example, decide that here there's an error and suppose that it's a terminology error and its severity is major, and we can flag the issue. And now this segment is flagged as having an LQA issue. And then in another segment, I can add an accuracy error. So this is the profile that you can customize, right? So the profile that I'm using right now is the basic one where I have this error taxonomy. This taxonomy can be customized as you wish. So here I can add an accuracy error. And in this case, let's say that it is minor, and so on and so forth. And then all we have to do is click on Finish LQA when we're done. Of course, I'm showing this from the project manager profile just to show you how it works, but usually, of course, this can be assigned to linguists. So let's just finish the LQA. So at the end of the LQA, I get a score based on a threshold. So my pass-fail threshold was 99%. So I got an LQA score of 90%. So I got a fail because my score is lower than my threshold. Now that I have run my LQA, I can go back to my project and I can see the LQA score here appearing in the column in the last workflow step. And if I click on it, I can also export my scorecard as an Excel file or send it via email. Now, just to mention that Phrase also offers a tool that can automate the whole LQA process, which is a manual and time-consuming task, as you, I'm sure, know. In the project settings, all we have to do is going back to our workflow steps. And here we have auto LQA. So you can enable this and an LLM will run on your content and do the exact same thing that I've just done manually. So annotating errors in your document. Of course, this can also be combined with human interventions to speed up the work of your linguist. All right, we're almost at the end of this webinar. I hope you still have the energy to follow me through the last topic, and it is our help and resources button. This is where you can get access to all our resources. So you can get help via chat. You can visit our help center that contains articles explaining all the functionalities that we've just looked at and also the ones that we haven't looked at. You can also access YouTube videos where we show the latest features added to our platform. And you can also have a look at the legal documents. And this concludes our tour of Phrase TMS for project managers. I hope this was useful. And of course, I'm here to answer any questions. Thank you very much.
Perfect. So we are at the end of the demo and we already have questions in Slido. There were a couple of questions, or actually several, about the search functionality. So there is a question whether it's available for all plans, because some people, even with admin rights, couldn't see it. And there were multiple questions about that. So could you please comment?
Yeah, sure. So, right, this search option that I was showing, the one to search across all projects, is available in the business or enterprise plans, and it is available only for users with admin or project management rights. So if you're not seeing that bar, it's either you do not have project management or admin rights, or you're not on a business or enterprise plan. So of course, what I've shown during the webinar is everything that you can have in Phrase, but then there might be things that, depending on your rights or on your plan, you might not see.
Yes, thank you for clarifying that. Another question about the search functionality. Can we use search as exact match option?
Yeah, so I'm not 100% sure what you mean here, but yeah, so when you search, if I understand the question correctly, when you search, you phrase by default is going to look exactly for the string that you are looking for. You can also use regular expressions. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but with regular expression, you can use patterns. For example, if you search for auto followed by an asterisk, you are going to find all occurrences for auto and also automatic, for example. And yeah, and so this is, I think if I have the question right, this is what I can say.
Okay. Thank you. Let's move on. If we use one single translation memory for all languages and projects, but different projects have a different collection of target languages, is it possible to create a template with a translation memory only without specifying target language?
No, so the project template always needs to contain the relevant target languages and the translation memory as well. So what you can do is you could create different templates to cover all the target languages that you need. You can also have a single project template where you add all the target languages that you need, and then if you don't use one target language in a project, that's completely fine. So you can have a project that you can use a template that contains 12 target languages and create a project and only populate 6 target languages. When you create a job, you can decide for which languages you are going to upload a file. So the six languages in your project, for example, won't have any job attached to them, for example. So this is what you can do, either multiple templates and multiple TMs, or a single template with all the target languages that are relevant for you.
Thank you very much. In the term-based section, I can't find the option to use term-based for QA. Can you show it again, or is it not included in all plans?
So I can show it again. Maybe I can share my screen real quick. So let me just. Okay, here we go. So I can open really any project. And if you scroll down inside a project and you go to the term basis section, if you click on select, for example, you are going to see the list of term bases that you have in your instance. And for each of them, you can decide whether you want to use them for the QA as well or not. So this is where I was setting this up. I hope this helps.
And all plans should have this available, right?
I think this should be available in all plans. Yes, yes. So if you notice that if you go through the same steps that I just went through and you still don't see it, maybe just let us know and I will look into that to understand why, but it should be available for all plans. Maybe one explanation might be that the user doesn't have rights to handle term basis or limited rights to handle term basis, but it shouldn't be the case.
Okay. So Mona, let us know in case you still cannot find it. All right. Where are projects stored after 12 months? Are they automatically archived and can they be accessed?
Okay, so phrase policy for projects is projects are automatically deleted only after 12 months of inactivity. So after 12 months, during which you haven't created any new job, for example, or editing an existing job inside a project, that project is going to be deleted. And then after deletion, the project is still going to be searchable in the recycle bin. So after being deleted, the project is going to be stored in the recycle bin for 30 days. So you have 30 days to look through the recycle bin and find your project and restore it if needed, or change anything in the project so that you make its life longer again. So they are not archived, they are deleted. Archiving is manual. You can archive your projects, and then again, once they are archived, you can access your archive and find your project and restore it.
Thank you. That's very useful. Next question is about user management. What is the difference between the users in the TMS and in the dashboard? So the whole platform, so to say. And where is the best place to add new users?
Yeah, this is a good question. So it depends on the use cases. Basically, whenever you add a user in TMS, typically this user is a user that will only have access to TMS. If you want to create users that are going to have access to multiple products, for example, to TMS, but also to strings, which is our product to handle key value-based file formats, then I would recommend to create a user in the dashboard directly. So it depends on the access that you want to give to these users. If they only need access to TMS, I would create the user directly in TMS.
Thank you very much. On that topic, I think we had a webinar where we were showing the user management in a little bit more detail. Let me actually search for it quickly and share it in the Zoom chat with you. So the webinar is searchable on phrase.com/resources/webinars, and the session was called Smarter Project Management in Phrase TMS. So there are some extra tips for you. I will share the link now. And because it's a on-demand webinar, you can just search through the individual chapters. And the first chapter in the recording is called User Management, and the speaker covers the differences between creating a user on the platform level versus the TMS or strings level. So it can give you a better overview of what can be useful for you. Okay, and the last question, I defined a linguist for a workflow step in a template and using a project based on this template over a longer period. Now the linguist changes and I adapt this in the template. Will the project be updated with the changes in the template?
Okay. Yeah, that's a good question. So I understand the use case, but if you change a user or if you change any setting inside a template, the changes are not going to be propagated to all the projects that you have created with that template. The reason behind that is that it might be risky, right? That might be a bit risky because you create a project today, and then in 2 months you need to update and change the TM that you're using on that project or change the user that you want to add to that project. It can be risky because you might add a user to projects that are not relevant for them, right? So the answer is no. If you have updated the template, the changes will be relevant for all the projects that you create after the project template update, but not retroactively pushed to all the templates that you have created with that all the projects that you have created with that template.
Okay, thank you very much. That seems to be the last question. So with that, I'm going to wrap it up. Thank you so much, Randy, for the demo and for addressing all the questions. Thank you to all the participants for tuning in, for sticking till the end. Thank you very much and have a good rest of the day. And bye-bye. Thanks,
Thank you very
Randy.
much. Bye.